Testing. Okay, it looks like... Yeah, it looks like the audio is getting picked up. Let's see. So we'll... And let's... We'll share that screen. I don't think anybody's watching, but if you are, sorry while I'm getting set up. Well, at any rate. All right. Hello, everyone. So, good bit later getting started than I wanted to, but so basically what this is I am going to be building out an AI assistant, a chatbot for the Audius platform called Atris. And I talked about this a little bit in my last video, but basically I've spent a lot of time building this, and effectively I was building it with LangGraph.js and was way over using the framework, kind of to shape the entire application, which gives you a lot more added complexity all the way down. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be rebuilding Atris, but using the models directly and seeing how it goes. So where we left off, there we go. Let me get everything arranged really quick. So where we left off last time was we had, and I gotta move this up between screens. Okay. So where we were at last time was we had the AI edit our chat input component to handle submissions and manage the chat state is what it says. So here's kind of the query that I gave it. So basically here I gave it a description of what we're going to do, which is we're going to start by building a router where an LLM, we're going to give an LLM some context, and it's going to take it through one of three different paths. So those paths, as you can see there, is we're either going to call the Audius API, we're going to perform some retrieval for web docs, and if none of the above apply, then we're going to use a web search, and if the query is just completely irrelevant, then we're going to return something to the user that says that Atris is only going to answer questions about Audius content. So let's take a look here at what we did. So basically we had the AI analyze the code base, which isn't very big. And it goes through because I asked it to summarize what I just told it. And it goes through and it says, essentially what I told it, which was good. And I wanted to make sure that what we had in context as far as the AI's understanding of what we're going to be doing here was in alignment before it started generating code. So essentially, in order to do this and lay the groundwork for it, it gave us a little list here, which looks pretty good. So we're going to extend the current chat input component to handle submissions, which we actually did earlier. We're going to create a new backend API endpoint to receive the user queries. We're going to implement the routing logic and the handlers, integrate with the Audius SDK for entity queries, to say queries about what that would usually be as tracks, users, or playlists. We're going to set up the documentation, storage, and indexing for technical documentation. So what that probably means is we're going to chunk a bunch of documents and throw them into a database, which I've actually already done. So we might just be able to connect to that. And we'll use RAG whenever the user asks a question about something technical with like the Audius protocol versus the platform. And then finally, we're going to give it a web search, and we're going to use Exa. So what I had to do for that first point, we'll actually just kind of, I think there's somewhere that we can get like a work pad, but whatever. We'll just add a, let's say, order of operations.txt. We'll just post that there. We'll go back to this component. So I asked it to implement the extension that it had in mind. It generated some code here. Generated a summary of what it did. And then I had it do what I'm going to be having it do a lot on this stream, which is I'm going to be having it write comments in the code after it's generated the code, describing what it does. It may be a more, as you can see, kind of dense way than it usually would. And the reason that I want to do that is because when you're working with Gen AI and you're having Gen AI write a bunch of code for you, the big problem that you can get into is that it can be tough to keep up with what exactly the AI just did, like on an intuitive level. So like you're going to have to kind of work through it more to see what it wrote. And so the big benefit of having it write comments in the code after it's already generated the code is basically just separation of concerns, right? The less context that it has to work with, the fewer steps that it has to work through in any given shot, generally the better. So let's go ahead and just read through this. So we're initializing our Hano client, and like I've actually never used Hano before. Let me just go and search like what it is. I'm wondering if it's like is it like an Express type thing? It looks like an Express type thing. Huh. Oh yeah, okay. Hano is a simple web application framework similar to Express without a front end, but it runs on CDN edges and allows you to construct more applications when combined with middleware. So we'll need to build some middleware at some point is what I'm getting off of that. But yes, it's similar to Express. Define the structure of the chat messages. So we got an interface here. And that makes sense, right? The content of the message, the role, a timestamp. Input text, right? So we've got our booleans and our setters here. Reference to the text area element, which we'll be using further down, I take it, or in the main app. I took to ensure dynamic text area resizing. Okay. So we've got a handler here. Awesome. Create and add user message to chat. Cool. Role user. I'm not going to worry about that. This is just a TypeScript thing. It shouldn't affect our actual functionality. Set messages. Yep. Awesome. Little keyboard shortcuts. Oh, that's nice. And Shift Enter for the new line. That's seems pretty standard with chatbots. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, what are we mapping to here? That might be a good thing to ask Claude. So we need to, I guess instantiates the word, index that we're mapping the messages to somewhere. Line 94. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Right, because it's, we're not going to have the same timestamp for multiple messages within the same thread. So that's good enough for now, since at any given time, if there's like a user and information about a user and multiple like users using the application, they've got their own thing going because they're both logged in separately. So that'll work. This right here, I'm still not worried about. So that's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a get init, and we're going to do get at a status s, cool, get commit m, initial commit Audius login functional. Cool. I'll set up a GitHub repo at some point, but just staying in the flow here. So what's next? So let's open up a new chat, and we're going to say, actually, let me actually go up and get my original description. we're actually going to do a new system prompt just to keep me from saying some of the same things over and over. I was trying the God prompt before. It didn't really seem to have too much an effect for what I'm doing, but the dude that came up with it's much more experienced than I am. So maybe I'm using it wrong. All right. So there's that general description. So let's just go project description. And let's see. Let's call it behavioral guidelines. And so this is where I'm just going to give it some preferences on how I want it to work through problems. The amount of any given problem that I want to work on, or I want it to work on at any given time. So let's say, and I always add this first, please approach challenges and specifications from a first principles, I guess, hold on. Or let's just say using a first principles approach. If appropriate, use P1, P2, QED syntax to express your reasoning, or explain the reasoning behind ideas that you propose. And what that is I think it's called a syllogism, but the idea is so we'll have P1, which is premise one, P2, which is premise two, and then QED, which is therefore. So we have this first thing that we accept to be true, potentially more. So we'll add a ellipsis there. We say that due to these reasons, this is the recommendation. And having the AI kind of work through that, there's this paper called Logic LLM, I think is what it's called, where it came out a few months ago, where they were able to get better quality output out of the LLM by telling it to approach things using formal logic. So I don't want to weigh it down, too much with that stuff, but that usually is pretty effective. So let's see. Let's see what else we want to do. Let's say never guess if you don't have access to a certain document or piece of information, ask the user to provide it rather than making assumptions about that document's content or the accuracy of a piece of info. Ask questions frequently and ask questions frequently. We will question our own assumptions often. And let's see if there's anything else. Let's add one more thing. Try not to default to complex solutions. This project's raison d'etre is the effectiveness of the KISS principle. We will keep things simple, and when it comes to LLM implementations, or let's go LLM driven implementations, we will use the models directly. All right, and that looks pretty good. So that's saved. So let's go back to the new chat. Kind of having that there. So go. We now need to create a new, or to create a new backend API endpoint to receive the user's queries from the chat input, and it'll have everything else in its system prompt. So let's go propose a solution utilizing only the libraries / dependencies in the package.json already, if possible. And I want to do that because, part of the idea behind not using a framework is that you don't get all of the dependencies that exist within that framework. So there's a lot fewer puzzle pieces to put together. So what I'm going to do is we'll do that. And what I'll need to do is we'll go npm install OpenAI. And while I'm waiting on that, let's see what else we have here. Cool. We'll have it comment through the code in a bit. I'm hoping this isn't going to crash cursor. NPM likes to crash cursor. I don't know if anybody else has that problem. It doesn't work on my machine. So while we're waiting to find out. Oh, there we go. So what I want to do is tell it, please go through index.tsx. There we go. So we've got all three. Yep, so chat input.tsx and and add comments explaining what the code does. where necessary. And I'm fine with just kind of continuing to give it the code base because the code base is small. And Claude's got a really solid context window. It's like 200K. Of course, I know that like Gemini's got like what, like 1.5 million or something. It's nuts. Probably should give Gemini another shot. I know it's good for like multimodal. All right. So let's examine what this thing did. So just imported that. We haven't used it yet. That's fine for now. So we added that import. Environment variables. Initialize the Hano app with longer middleware, which I'm sure we'll get into more of the middleware as this goes on. Factory function to create the SDK instance. Of course. And we've already got our use SDK hook here. So I'm going to draw the AI's attention to that. Say, hey, take a look at the file at here. We've got a hook already to use the Audius SDK. I see that we've instantiated it again in here. Index.ts x from lines 23 to 34. And we explore using the hook instead and altering the code in use sdk.ts where necessary. Actually, hold on, let me cancel that. Give it the code base. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, whoops. Dumb question. That's why we ask these things. Yeah, because I asked a dumb question, so it's I can always have kind of the general application structure better in my mind at any given time. So let's read through it. So, okay. So yeah, that would seem to, well, nah. I'd rather separate concerns. So we'll just go through here. Find response time for chat router. Root route. Here's the React application. Conditional script loading based on the environment. Okay, so that's like pre and post transpilation. Endpoint to favorite track. That's unaltered. That's unaltered as well. Okay. Be replaced with action. Router logic. So we'll just have this in here as a to-do. Then we've got our server routes here. So we've set up our new endpoint down here for the chat. And we're going to want to, over time, implement a lot more here. So we're going to want the user to be able to do all kinds of things. But for right now, for the scope of where we're at, this is fine. So that looks good. Let's take a look here at, okay, so it didn't update anything there. All right. So there we go, clipping right along. Implement the routing logic and the handlers. So let's go back and just take a look where that's going to be. So we're going to want to do that right here. So let's walk through. We'll do a new chat. And we'll say we're on step 3. Just scroll down over here. Let's go. You have the workflow summarized in your system prompt. Now, here's what I'm going to do. So this is where, now that we're going to be implementing some behavior rather than just kind of like writing the definitions for what that behavior is going to be, now that we're going to be doing some implementations, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to have some tests that we can run the functionality against from the very beginning. So the reason that I want to do that, and I'm sure that a lot of people have heard different things about test-driven development. So you can think about it just kind of on a spectrum from, like, on one end, we write tests for every single thing that the application does and every single possible edge case that could ever come up. We're not going to do that. On the other hand, we can write an application where we have just no testing, and we're just kind of flying blind every time something breaks, and that's not a good thing to do either. The reason why I would lean on that continuum more towards the former than the latter is when you have tools like Composer or like Cascade or Klein or whatever Gen AI coding tool that you're using, the big thing that introduces is the possibility for small context collapses along the generative process in terms of what it's actually giving you in your editor. So one thing that we can do, because code generation is just generating something that's mostly correct, is very, very, very easy now. The trick, I think, to writing tests ahead of time with that technology is that you're able to catch errors before they propagate, or if they do propagate, you're able to tell where they come from. So that's the approach that we're going to take here. So we'll say before we generate the code that will actually implement the behavior, I'd like us to write some tests that will help us understand whether or not the functionality is working as intended, and if not, where the process or processes, say process or processes, are failing. Don't generate any code yet. Let's just talk about let's just discuss what we want the parameters of these tests to be. What do we need to check, and what would it be nice for them to check? So let's submit that. All right, so cool. So it's giving us that, P1, P2, ... QED format. So the router needs to correctly classify queries into one of 4 categories. Entity queries, which are about content on the Audius platform. Technical queries, which are about more the protocol than the platform. General queries about Audius, which would be like, who is the CEO of Audius? So a question that's not going to be answered by the documentation or by the API. And then unrelated queries where the user is going to get some kind of response like, hey, ask something about Audius. Each category requires different processing logic. Reasonable. The system must maintain consistent behavior across different phrasings of similar queries. Error handling must be robust and informative. So here's the key testing areas that we need to cover according to the AI. So, okay, so let's start with our query classification tests, because that's what we'll want to implement first. Is we'll want to be able to generate a bunch of queries and get some high level of accuracy in terms of how we categorize them. So test clear examples of each category, test edge cases between categories, mixed intents, multilingual queries, malformed, and empty queries. All right, so the good thing is that we've already got some logic here that is preventing empty queries. So I believe that's here in the chat input component. So I forget where we had that. We'll find it in a minute. So what it's doing here is it's giving us the most appropriate places in the code to do this. And if you guys will excuse me for a moment. I'm going to step out and I will be back shortly. I'm sure there's a pause the stream on my end, but I'm not sure what it is. At any rate, hello, everybody. All right, so I'm not exactly sure how to pause the stream. So just to not like leave this streaming, I'll end it. We'll be back very shortly.